This is my son, Calvin. He's 22 now, right?
23,
23?
I think.
Cesar Millan, a name that has become a legendary symbol in the world of dog training. However, behind the global fame of this internationally recognized figure, are there any secrets that have never been revealed? Recently, his son, the direct heir to the Millan dynasty, decided to break his silence and unveil some shocking truths about the father everyone admires. It turns out that behind the genius trainer there lies a dark side, a ruthless system that no one had ever known about. So what truths are being hidden? Join us in today's video to uncover the answer. 1. Hidden childhood memories. According to civil records in Los Angeles, the relationship between Cesar Millan and his ex-wife Ilusion Millan began to show clear signs of strain as early as 2007. The main cause of this rift was Cesar's dedication to his media work, traveling, producing television shows and commercial training projects while paying little attention to his family. The distance was not only physical, but also emotional, especially in his role as a father. The divorce was officially approved by the court in 2010, with their eldest son, Andre Millan, being 15 years old, and their second son, Calvin, only 11. After the divorce, temporary custody of Calvin was granted to Cesar Millan for specific periods. From this point on, a series of previously undisclosed details emerged, mentioned only in therapy records and private interviews. Calvin described the place as without neighbors, no Wi-Fi, no cell phones, just dogs. During this period, Cesar Millan began using prescription painkillers initially for treating back pain from injuries sustained while training. However, according to a doctor in Florida, the frequency and dosage of the medication exceeded normal recommendations, leading to mild dependency that lasted for months. According to Calvin's testimony during a psychological consultation in 2017, his time living with his father took place on a remote plot of land on the outskirts of Medellin, Colombia, a property Cesar had purchased to establish a rehabilitation center for stray dogs. This land did not appear in any of Millan's public schedules and had never been covered by the media. There was no regular staff at this location, nor were there any official training activities. He had witnessed his father tying a Labrador dog's leg to a steel post in the middle of a cement yard, forcing it to stand still for 6 hours without interaction, response, or food, with the goal of teaching it obedience through stillness and silence. This method was never publicly shared on any of Cesar Millan's media platforms. Another incident Calvin recalled involved Cesar forcing a dog to eat raw meat, then locking it in a dark room for 3 days to activate survival instincts. A financial failure was also recorded in the internal accounting records involving an investment of nearly $2 million in a dog breeding company in Florida, which did not yield the expected results. Although no lawsuits or public legal disputes were filed, this loss coincided with the period when Cesar started applying training methods considered extreme by former staff members. Calvin stated that starting in 2011, Cesar's behavior in animal training changed dramatically. As a result, Calvin began exhibiting signs of behavioral disorders, chronic insomnia, avoiding contact with animals, extreme anxiety when hearing dogs bark, and displaying clear symptoms of avoidant depression. No therapeutic measures were applied at that time. Calvin claimed he had protested this action but was dismissed with the reason, dogs don't need pity. They need to have their instincts restructured. On one occasion, Calvin said he was forced to sit still and watch an entire training session without speaking or leaving, only to be locked alone in a room for 30 minutes for lack of emotional control. In 2013, Calvin voluntarily left the property and returned to the US to live with his mother. From then on, there was no contact with Cesar Millan. Calvin left no letters offered, no explanation, and did not maintain any communication. His school records show that he changed his surname at a high school in Oregon to avoid being identified as Cesar Millan's son. This situation lasted nearly 3 years. An important detail in the therapy records in Utah shows that during a recall session through layered therapy, Calvin remembered being forced to stand in front of a dog cage in dim lighting, observing the animal's eyes for extended periods without any response. When asked for the reason, Calvin could not provide a clear answer, but the therapist suggested this could be a form of forced behavioral empathy, testing a technique often used in reflexive training methods. All of the above information was taken from therapy records, internal recordings, and indirect confirmation from staff members who had worked at the Medellin Rehabilitation Center. The witnesses refused to disclose their identities. The conclusion from the clinical doctor in 2016 stated, "The environment of living with a famous father inadvertently turned the patient into a part of an unofficial training model." Therapists later confirmed that Calvin had not only suffered from the broken family environment, but had also been placed in a forced behavioral training environment where actions similar to animal behavior modification techniques were applied to humans. This form of counter-conditioning exposure could disrupt the ability to recognize emotions, causing long-term damage to psychological and social development. 2. Connection to classified documents. The harm did not come from violent behavior, but from being assimilated into a behavioral system that the patient was not allowed to choose. One of the most notable sections of the document contained the following. Subject 7 showed unstable reactions upon hearing the voice of their father. Biological tests indicated that the emotional system had gone beyond control. The file did not list any real names, only identification numbers. However, when the investigators compared the information in this document with the therapy records of Calvin Millan, Cesar's son, they found significant overlaps. In September 2022, when investigators conducted their second examination of the secret basement area in Cesar Millan's mansion, they discovered a set of documents carefully stored in a moisture-proof box. This file had not been disclosed during the previous legal audit. On the cover of the file was a label reading "Subject Tracking Sheet for internal use only," along with a red stamp marking it as highly classified, not to be released to the public. Although the photo is unclear, the timing coincides with the period when Calvin was living with his father at the Wild Dog Rehabilitation Facility in Colombia, a detail that had never been made public in the media. When asked about the photo during a psychological therapy session, Calvin said it could be him, though he didn't recall the specific situation. For instance, the description of Subject 7 included, "Had close contact with the primary leader during childhood, frequently stood near the animal confinement area, not allowed to speak or react, appeared to have the ability to look animals directly in the eye without showing fear." An old photograph from the 2006 surveillance system shows a 10-year-old boy in a white shirt standing near a metal cage in a rather dimly lit space. FBI experts concluded that it is highly probable Calvin was unknowingly subjected to a behavioral observation procedure from a young age. Although he was not treated as a test subject, he may have been used as part of a test to measure animal reactions when interacting with humans in a neutral state, particularly with children. Interestingly, in the following years, Calvin began exhibiting emotional and behavioral disorders. However, he did share one detail. He was once forced to stand for hours in a dark room, staring at the dog's eyes without blinking or making a sound. This matched exactly with the notes in the classified document. Maintain eye contact throughout the interaction, lasting up to 15 minutes. No speaking, no reactions. Observe the emotional responses of the animals. While no specific names are given, this detail coincides with Calvin's experience, indicating that Cesar Millan's voice, typically familiar to animals, triggered fear responses in his own son. The classified documents also included a list of individuals involved in animal behavior observation tests in controlled environments. When he was made to listen to his father's voice in a recording, he displayed a clear physical reaction. His heart raced, his hands trembled, and his gaze became unfocused. These responses were similar to intense fear reflexes, often seen in individuals who have undergone psychological conditioning. In another section of the document, it states, "The father's voice causes strong emotional disturbance in female subject group F." This raised suspicions that someone had prior knowledge of the investigation, and had acted quickly to erase potentially damaging footage. All the evidence, from the classified document, old photos, physical reactions, and deleted data, strongly suggests that Calvin Millan may have been part of an animal training environment, not just for observation, but as a reaction factor in behavioral conditioning tests on animals. Among them, Subject 7 stood out as one of the few individuals highlighted for their strong reactions when in the presence of the senior trainer, likely referring to Cesar Millan himself. Additionally, when investigators checked the hard drive of the surveillance room's computer, they found a series of videos labeled OBS7 that had been deleted the day before the police raided the house. The data revealed that the videos had existed but had been manually deleted on site, not remotely. 3. The broken connection. The investigators concluded, if this information is accurate, this is not just a violation of family ethics, but an exploitation of the blood relationship for the purpose of biological control. Whether directly or indirectly, the level of harm is undeniable. In the records of Cirque Lodge, a high-end rehabilitation center in Utah where Calvin was treated in 2014, doctors noted a strange behavior. When faced with the pressure of group communication, Calvin had a habit of repeating a single action, lightly scratching his wrist and whispering the word alpha. The doctors believed that this was not just a normal memory, but a psychological obsession related to previous training sessions. From 2013 to 2015, psychological experts assessed this period as the complete break between Cesar Millan and his son Calvin Millan. After leaving the training facility in Colombia without prior notice, Calvin completely cut off all contact, not sending letters, not responding to messages, and refusing to reveal his whereabouts to anyone in his father's family. He did not want to hear his name mentioned, did not allow any video or audio recordings of Cesar's voice to be played, and refused all exercises that involved writing letters to his father. Experts describe this as a form of complete communication, rejection equivalent to locking away his own emotions. Also in 2014, Calvin officially changed his last name when he transferred to a high school in Oregon. His new name no longer had any connection to the Millan family. In another report from the center, the chief doctor remarked, Cesar Millan tends to revert to controlling animals whenever he feels powerless in human communication. This is the cycle of someone who loses real power, seeking to regain a sense of dominance through creatures that do not resist. During this time, Calvin refused to participate in all group therapy sessions related to his father. A rare document found in Cesar's house, a draft of a letter that was never sent, contained the opening words, "If one day you understand why I chose silence, you will understand that I have never not loved you. I just loved you in a different way." The letter had no signature, no date, and ended on the second page. Investigators believed that Cesar had written many such letters, but never sent them, perhaps because he felt he no longer had the right to intrude on Calvin's personal space. In the admission form, he stated that he had lost contact with his father since he was a child, and left the section about his father's family blank. This was seen as an act of legal and psychological severance, often occurring in cases of abuse history or family conflicts that cannot be healed. Family psychologists called this a multi-layered withdrawal, a breakdown in family relationships that was not only external, but also deep affecting psychological, social, and personal identity aspects of each individual. When a child rejects the identity associated with their father, it is a sign of an irreparable rift that cannot be mended with apologies or time. Cesar Millan never publicly spoke about Calvin's abandonment. Andre Cesar's eldest son admitted in private interviews that the relationship between the two brothers had also gradually become distant as Andre continued to collaborate with his father on various projects, while Calvin completely withdrew. This difference created an unbridgeable gap between the two brothers. Andre stopped mentioning his younger brother in public interviews after 2015. Everyone understood something had been lost forever. The silence between the two remained for over 3 years with no signs of reconciliation. However, what was truly frightening was not the silence itself, but how the silence had become the default state to the point where neither of them knew how to label the relationship anymore. No one in the family proactively sought joint therapy. There were no legal records of any desire for reconciliation. Since 2015, he has not mentioned his youngest son in any interviews, articles, or television shows. Although he maintained his image as a master dog trainer, internally, those who had worked with him said, Cesar became more withdrawn, focusing only on business models and writing books. A former unnamed assistant recalled, he used to sit for hours in his office just staring at the blueprint of a new training camp that was never built. No one dared to ask anything. The lack of any opposition from the father suggests either silent consent or active denial. Whatever the case, the result led to the same conclusion: no communication between the two sides. No emails, messages, or inquiries between the two. Each of them, in their own direction, lived as though the other had never existed. The FBI, when analyzing events related to training documents and the cage breed records noted in their final report, it cannot be confirmed that Cesar Millan directly involved his son in the experimental program, but it is clear that both were present in the same area during the system's implementation phase. 3 years after completely cutting off contact with his father, Calvin Millan, then 19 years old, made a brief phone call which turned out to be a pivotal moment, marking a turning point in both his investigation file and his psychological recovery process. On November 12, 2015, the day of the call, Calvin had just completed nearly 6 months of therapy at a high-end behavioral rehabilitation center in northern Utah. 4. The fateful call. According to the supervising therapist on that day, Calvin suddenly asked for permission to use his personal phone at a time not scheduled for phone calls. The phone number he used to make the call was a private number that had never been made public. Reportedly, the personal number of Cesar Millan not listed in any contact directory or media. The center's records indicated that Calvin was being treated for chronic anxiety post-traumatic stress disorder and the consequences of emotional isolation during his adolescence, along with a brief history of temporary dependency on certain sedatives in the early stages. This call was not prompted by anyone requesting it, nor was he encouraged by anyone to make it. Sometime later, Cesar and his son decided to begin an 18-month family therapy journey under the guidance of professionals. The therapy sessions were not just for conversation, but also for listening to each other's hurts, something Cesar had never done with his son before. He was forced to face the truth that despite his own suffering, it could not erase his responsibility for causing harm to others, particularly to those he loved. No one knows what was said in the conversation, but afterward, Calvin proactively suggested participating in a family therapy program. Although Cesar Millan made no public response that same week, he canceled 3 filming sessions in New York and quietly returned to California earlier than planned. A senior assistant confirmed that he avoided appearing on camera, instead spending hours in his private office, which he previously used to schedule training sessions. Signal analysis showed that this device had been inactive from July 2013 to the end of October 2015 and was only reactivated about 2 weeks prior to the call. The call lasted 17 minutes and 42 seconds, and Calvin agreed to record the conversation for therapeutic records. Cesar was unaware of the contents of the call, but he did not refuse to talk. However, he has never confirmed or shared any details about the conversation in any media. He realized that every principle applied to animals, such as calmness, setting boundaries, rewarding, and consistency, could also be applied to people if adjusted and executed with compassion. He later shared in a post, "When I teach people how to train pets, I always say, you can't help them stabilize if you haven't stabilized yourself." I later realized this is also true for family relationships. I wasn't stable, so I made others feel unsafe. This was not a vacation, but a spiritual journey where they could reflect on the past without judgment and reset their relationship on a new foundation, honest, clear, and unforced. During this time, Cesar also began to shift his perspective on dog training, moving toward a closer connection to human development. These therapy sessions were not easy, but they were an important step in rebuilding trust and a sense of safety between father and son. A significant milestone in the reconciliation process was a special trip in 2017 to a meditation retreat in Arizona. There, the father and son spent a week in a quiet environment participating in activities such as meditation, nature walks, writing letters to each other, and engaging in interactive therapy exercises. From the rehab center in Utah to the meditation retreat in Arizona, from solitary journal pages to heartfelt conversations, from physical detox to acknowledging mistakes in relationships, all of these laid the foundation for a new version of Cesar Millan. Strong not because he has no scars, but because he dared to look at them and chose the path of healing. It was a long series of small, persistent, and continuous decisions to slowly rebuild the man. He is not only for himself, but for those he loves. Since then, he has become more careful in expressing his emotions, no longer maintaining the always fine image he had before. Weakness is no longer seen as a flaw, but as an essential part of creating genuine connection. Instead of trying to be the hero he chose to be, the father who admits his mistakes, apologizes, and is willing to learn how to love again, an awakening process. Cesar's healing journey was not a single moment, nor the result of one action. The realization that even he had struggled with his own inner demons became a powerful reminder that anyone can fall, and we all have the potential to rise again. Immediately after Cesar shared his first insights about the dark period in a special interview, thousands of fans from all over the world sent messages of encouragement through texts, emails, handwritten letters, and comments. When the information about the deep crisis Cesar Millan went through was made public, the whole world, which had been following him for nearly a decade through his show, The Dog Whisperer, expressed shock sympathy and strong support. For many people, Cesar was not just a dog trainer, but a symbol of perseverance, calmness, and the ability to connect beyond language barriers. 5. The silent support. I decided to try changing my approach, and now I have 2 dogs, a Rottweiler and a Bulldog, and I love them like my own children. Others shared that thanks to Cesar, they finally understood that training an animal also requires emotional maturity from the human side. His famous saying, "You can't change a dog's behavior if you haven't changed your own energy," became a guiding principle in their relationships, whether at homework or with themselves. Especially many affirmed that Cesar Millan had completely changed their lives, not only by teaching them how to train dogs, but also by helping them better understand themselves. One woman shared, "I used to be afraid of dogs because I was chased and bitten by one when I was a child. But after watching Cesar's show, I began to understand why dogs behave the way they do. I realized I was looking at them through a lens of fear, and they were just reacting to that energy." These messages not only expressed support, but also reflected the profound impact he had on the lives of individuals. These stories quickly spread across forums, social media emails, and even through handwritten letters sent to Cesar's training center. Many of those sharing their experiences were not only pet owners, but also individuals facing their own internal battles. And they found strength, knowing that even someone like Cesar had fallen and was able to rise again. Instead of always presenting himself as the alpha, who controlled everything, he chose to share more about the lessons, failures, wounds, and things he was still working on changing. This did not diminish his credibility. On the contrary, it created a more genuine connection between him and his followers. In many workshops that followed, he did not hesitate to recount his struggles with Vicodin, depression, and feelings of not deserving to live. He shared, "I used to think that if I failed, everyone would turn their backs on me. But the public's response made me realize that when you are honest about your pain, you don't lose respect. On the contrary, you are loved even more." From that moment on, Cesar began to change how he communicated with the public. Many international pet training organizations also expressed their admiration and support for Cesar's courage in openly revealing his hidden pain. The public's response not only made Cesar feel loved, but also played a crucial role in his recovery after the crisis. In later interviews, he admitted that it was the support from his fans that helped him overcome feelings of guilt, shame, and prolonged loneliness. 6. the return of a legend. Cesar's journey through crisis was not only his personal story, but also a reflection of the individual journeys of thousands within the community. And it was the words of encouragement and heartfelt empathy from fans, even just a short message, that became an essential remedy, helping him continue his recovery, redefine himself, and rediscover his life's mission. His stories were not filled with self-pity, but were honest, calm, and responsible, exactly as he had taught pet owners to behave. No blaming, no avoiding, and no pretending. The feedback from the public, especially personal stories, also helped Cesar realize that his influence went beyond dog training. He didn't just change how people viewed their pets, he changed how they saw themselves, with empathy, understanding, and patience. That statement marked an important turning point in his thinking. Cesar Millan's return was not based on fame, nor was he trying to reclaim his old position, nor did he need a television show to prove himself. He wasn't trying to return as the dog whisperer, as a brand, but rather returning to his own image, a complete individual with his own identity, limits, emotions, and clear values. One of the most noticeable changes was in how he approached his work. Cesar entered a new phase in his life with a slow, intentional pace guided by his intuition. The very force he always believed led him to dogs and is now helping him rediscover himself. In an interview after completing his treatment and reintegrating into life, he shared, "I needed to reconnect with my true self. After losing so much, I realized that my true identity was still intact. No one can take that away from me unless I choose to lose it myself." After a long period of being submerged in crisis and a challenging journey to recovery, Cesar Millan returned not as a repaired version of himself, but as a completely new person, more mature, more aware, and choosing to live in alignment with his true self. He was no longer the man trying to control everything, nor was he the media figure chasing schedules, expectations, or the spotlight. In addition to teaching, he introduced new programs like Better Human, Better Dog, which not only focused on dog training, but also explored the connection between human psychological states and the behavior of their pets. Through this program, he emphasized that a dog's behavior is often just a reflection of its environment, especially the energy and emotional stability of its owner. Cesar no longer maintained the image of the absolute right teacher, but became a storyteller, sharing his mistakes, failures, valuable lessons, and his recovery journey. He was more open than ever before, talking about everyday experiences, taking medication, the emptiness after performances, the loneliness in a hotel after a long day of training, and even emotional conversations with his daughter during his reconciliation process. Instead of expanding the scale of mass training, Cesar focused on high-quality limited enrollment courses held at the Dog Psychology Center in Santa Clarita, California. He focused on helping people change from the inside out, not just teaching them how to train dogs, but how they live, how they respond to their emotions, and how they connect with themselves. The most obvious difference is in how he interacts with the public. Cesar Millan, who once taught the world how to tame instincts, probably never anticipated that those very instincts would return to take control of his life, between the animal and the human. Which part is stronger in us? The answer, if there is one, may lie in the silence of those still living and the absence of those who have left. What do you think about this truth? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below this video. See you in the next videos. In his classes, he spent a lot of time discussing personal responsibility, consistency, setting healthy boundaries, and building a stable presence in life. Students were encouraged not only to learn how to manage dog behavior, but also to observe themselves, how they breathe, how they react to stress, and how they transform negative emotions.